Welcome in. It is so great to have you here with us today. Whether you are prepping for a big meeting, out for a walk, or just feeling insanely curious about how the world works, you are in the exact right place. Welcome to this deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Today, we are tackling a question that I think anyone who has ever tried to build a brand, sell a product, or frankly just manage their own career has agonized over. How do you actually stand out in a world where, well, absolutely everyone is shouting?
It really is the defining challenge of the digital age, isn't it? That the sheer volume of noise makes visibility difficult, but more importantly, it makes meaningful connection almost rare.
Exactly. And that brings us to our mission for this deep dive. We are unpacking the core insights from a truly fascinating piece of source material. It's titled Positioning: The Art of Defining Existential Distinctiveness in a Contested World.
Quite a title.
It is, yeah. And I have to tell you, this isn't about cheap marketing gimmicks or, catchy slogans. It treats positioning as a deep, almost philosophical practice. So whether you are building a massive corporate brand or you're simply trying to navigate your own professional path, we're going to reveal the psychology, the strategy, and the algorithms behind making people actually believe in your value.
Right. It demands that we look past surface-level tactics and understand positioning as a holistic system of meaning-making. We're going to explore how narratives literally hijack the human brain, how to navigate algorithmic gatekeepers, and, crucially, how to maintain your authenticity while doing all of it.
Okay, let's unpack this because the material starts off incredibly heavy, but in the best way possible. It argues that positioning is, at its core, an ontological assertion, which sounds like something I'd read in a graduate philosophy seminar.
Oh, absolutely.
So break that down for us. What does that actually mean in practice?
It's a very academic way of saying that out of all the infinite permutations of identity you could possibly have, you are stepping up and declaring, I choose to exist as this. The material actually grounds this in some serious philosophical frameworks. It brings up the idea of a Heideggerian clearing of market noise.
A Heideggerian clearing. Wow, that is a mouthful.
It is, but the concept is beautifully simple when you apply it. Think about the modern world. It is a complete cacophony of competing truths, viral trends, and hashtags. All of that noise obscures what's actually real. To truly position yourself, you have to cut through that noise and interrogate your ultimate purpose.
Right.
It also brings in Nietzsche's will to meaning. That sounds heavy too, but it essentially means that humans are desperate for purpose. When products and professional skills become entirely homogenized, when everyone can do the exact same thing, positioning is the alchemy that transforms functional, boring elements into powerful symbols.
And that alchemy really comes to life with the examples they give. Take a sustainable shoe brand, right? If they just say, hey, we strap recycled materials to your feet, nobody cares.
Exactly.
But if they position themselves as offering a covenant with ecological stewardship, suddenly they take you on a journey from a commodity to a conscience. Or the luxury car brand example.
A great one.
Marketing vehicles as chariots of rebirth. You aren't buying steel and horsepower. You're buying a narrative of liberation and status.
And that symbolic elevation is exactly what sustains differentiation in a consumer's long-term memory.
Oh, yeah.
But there is a massive trap here. It's what we call identity as imitation.
Oh, I see that everywhere.
Right. It is incredibly dangerous to just mimic whatever trend is hot right now. Authenticity isn't about having a totally fixed, unchanging self. It's about cultivating dialectical self-awareness. Basically, the ability to hold contradictions and evolve without losing your core truth.
Which is so hard to do when the market shifts. There was a great example of a software product that built its whole identity on being the fastest on the market. That works beautifully at first, but what happens when the entire market catches up? Suddenly, everyone is fast. Speed is just the baseline.
That's the pivot point. If that software wants to survive, it has to authentically recalibrate. It might shift its position to being, say, the most deliberate or the most secure in its engineering. It has to adapt to the new reality without abandoning its core identity.
Makes sense.
What's fascinating here is how we transition from that heavy existential philosophy into the actual strategic skeleton of positioning. This brings us to the concept of white space opportunities. People often mistake white space for just an empty vacuum of demand, a place where no one is selling something yet. But white space is actually about unspoken tensions in the audience's collective psyche.
So it's not just a gap in the market, it's a gap in the mind.
Perfectly said. It's a dialogue between where the market feels a void and how you bridge that void with a story that aligns with their latent desires.
And to bridge that, you have your unique value proposition. But again, this goes beyond a standard elevator pitch. Take the app developer who pairs deep technical prowess with a massive passion for solving global waste issues. They aren't just offering functional software.
No, they're offering a cultural narrative.
Exactly. They're combining the how with the why, but how do you actually visualize where you sit in the market?
That is where perceptual mapping comes in. Imagine you are literally drawing an X and Y axis on a whiteboard. You plot yourself or your brand against competitors on overlapping attributes. It forces you to see not just where your competitors are clustered, but where the customer's expectations actually live.
Let's make that concrete for everyone listening. If you are drawing this map for a B2C beauty brand and you just list cruelty-free ingredients, you might be slightly different, but you won't resonate. You have to plot yourself on that map as a visceral symbol of rebellion against industrial norms.
And in B2B, it's slightly different, but equally strategic. A nonprofit SaaS platform doesn't necessarily need to evoke raw rebellion, but it must align itself on the map with macro narratives, like data-driven social change.
And that works for individuals too, right?
Absolutely. A consultant mapping their career might weigh their deep technical AI expertise on one axis against their ability to provide hyperlocal, personalized solutions on another. You have to map out where you stand, but more importantly, where your audience actually wants to stand.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because all of this beautiful philosophy and strategic whiteboard mapping collides with the harsh reality of the digital age, the attention economy. We don't communicate in deep Socratic dialogues anymore. We are dealing with pixels, sound bites, and split seconds of interaction.
The first sip of engagement dictates whether your narrative is swallowed or spit out entirely. That brings us to the absolute necessity of visual storytelling. A highly intellectual LinkedIn post about sustainable project management tools will completely drown in the sea of peer content unless it's paired with infographics, video demos, and bite-sized case studies. Your value proposition has to be encapsulated visually.
And we cannot ignore the algorithms. The digital visibility game is no longer just about quality, it's about quantity in context. You called SEO a perceptual anchor earlier, and I'd love for you to explain that because I think it changes how we view search engines.
Think about it this way. If you are not indexed by the algorithm in the modern digital landscape, you effectively do not exist. Your positioning might be brilliant in a vacuum, but SEO is the anchor that ties that brilliant position to the reality of how people search for solutions.
And once you are anchored, you have to maintain that existence across incredibly different spaces. Take a global analytics platform. To survive, they have to engineer their messaging to focus on corporate harmony when they are marketing in Japan, but they pivot to emphasize aggressive disruption when they are pitching in Silicon Valley. Same core identity, totally different cultural lenses.
Which requires what we call strategic ambiguity. It's this wild paradox where you are bargaining for attention while desperately trying to keep your substance intact.
I love the mental health coach example for this. This coach uses 10-minute mindfulness reels on Instagram. That short-form video is the visual bait. It's snappy. It's what the algorithm loves. But the underlying position, the full meal, remains a deep cultural guidepost for cognitive resilience. You use the fast, flashy format to hook them, but you deliver the profound philosophical value once they are in the door. It feels a little like tricking the brain.
It absolutely is. And this naturally leads into how positioning interacts with human psychology. The mind is not a frictionless engine of perfect logic. It is a messy mosaic of cognitive shortcuts and behavioral biases. Effective positioning has to exploit these heuristics. It's about designing your narrative to circumvent conscious reasoning entirely.
Okay, I need you to break down some of these biases because the examples blew my mind. Let's start with anchoring bias. I fall for this every single morning. I see a $5 latte at an independent shop, and I think it's a steal because my brain is anchored to the $8 place down the street. How does positioning intentionally create that?
You just described it perfectly. By positioning themselves as cost-efficient compared to chain brands, that independent shop is sending a primacy signal. They are planting a perceptual anchor. The customer doesn't evaluate the $5 coffee in a vacuum. They evaluate it against that $6 to $10 bracket they've now been reminded of. It's a perceptual manipulation, not just a price tag.
Wow. And then you have framing effects, which just amplify that manipulation. If you have a healthcare product, you could frame it as 90% effective. But that doesn't hit the irrational mind the same way as framing it as a loss.
Exactly. Framing it as 10% less ineffective than alternatives, or more directly, don't lose control of your well-being, reshapes how important a perception feels.
No.
People are incredibly driven by the fear of loss.
And we can't forget the peak end rule, the idea that we
Ooh.
disproportionately remember the peak of an experience and the very end of it. So if you are launching a product, you need a massive climax, the big unveiling.
Right.
But if your ending is disjointed, it can literally erase all the strong messaging that came before it. You need a remarkably strong final impression, like a slick closing animation of community reviews. But how do you actually figure out what those peaks and ends should be? The material mentions things like conjoint analysis and laddering interviews. What does that actually look like in practice?
These are tools for narrative engineering. Conjoint analysis sounds highly technical, but it's basically a way to force people to make trade-offs so you can see what they actually value, rather than what they say they value. Laddering interviews take that a step further to uncover deep subconscious desires.
Like the luxury watch buyer, I thought this was fascinating.
Right. A buyer isn't sitting there logically weighing the price of a $20,000 watch against its physical durability. Deep down, through these laddering interviews, you find out they are weighing status against the myth of a timeless investment. Once you know that deep subconscious myth, your positioning becomes a cognitive intervention. You aren't pitching a watch anymore. You are predicting what truth their biased mind will embrace.
But obviously, you can't just set this up once and assume it's working perfectly forever. You have to measure it. And we aren't just talking about looking at basic KPIs like clicks or follower counts. Those are just the baseline, right?
Standard KPIs are merely the first draft of perception. They don't tell the whole story. You need advanced metrics to track this moving target.
What's an example of an advanced metric that actually tells you if your positioning is landing?
Look at attribute-based share of voice, or SOV. Imagine a health tech startup. They might completely dominate the conversation around being cost-effective in niche online forums. Their standard metrics look great. But if they try to compete in pricing arenas against massive established hospitals, their share of voice might plummet. Tracking this allows you to recalibrate your positioning to the spaces where your narrative is actually defensible. Another critical metric is price premium tracking.
So if your brand claims premium innovation as its position, but your users still consistently choose a cheaper, supposedly less innovative competitor,
Your narrative is basically a hallucination. It's completely disconnected from reality. Either your positioning isn't working or your product isn't living up to the narrative. And to figure out why there's a disconnect, you loop back to those laddering interviews. Ask a user why they upgraded to a premium project management platform. At first, they might list some software features. But if you ladder up asking why those features matter and why that matters, you find out they upgraded because of the promise of becoming a more effective leader. That transformation is what your positioning needs to measure and track.
that makes total sense.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is where positioning evolves into thought leadership. It is not just about occupying a space in the market. It is about defining the space entirely.
So why should you, the listener, care about this for your own career? Because this is the blueprint for the first mover advantage. The material cites the Commander Elias Drake concept and the ultimate real-world example, Netflix. They didn't just react to the market, they repositioned themselves from a DVD distributor to a content empire. In doing so, they engineered a brand new reality. They turned their incumbent competitors into rent-tape relics.
They shifted the entire narrative infrastructure of the industry. And this applies directly to the individual professional, too. The modern professional is a project of becoming. Your identity is not static. You must evolve in response to industry demands. A data scientist might start their career positioned as a problem solver, but as they grow, they evolve their narrative to become a culture architect. They tie their identity not just to the results they get, but to the methodologies they create that redefine industry standards.
It's all about adapting that core narrative. A SaaS expert might start as a privacy pioneer, but as the industry shifts, they adapt to merge privacy with AI. And take the example in the material of a corporate lawyer pivoting into environmental advocacy. Regardless of the politics behind it, the mechanics of how they rebrand are fascinating. They have to completely swap their legalist jargon for the language of ecological justice. And those high-fee corporate clients they used to have, they reframe that past work purely as documentation of systemic inefficiencies. It is a masterclass in editing your past narrative to fit the cognitive syntax of your new audience.
It also requires what we call prototyping identity. You cannot just guess what will work. You have to iteratively test messages and mediums. A professional might look at their LinkedIn analytics and discover that raw, real-world problem-solving videos build their credibility way faster than polished written articles. They allocate their attention to the format that actually aligns with their desired identity. It's a constant synthesis of self and context.
To really drive all of this home, there is an incredible case study that ties every single one of these concepts together. Coca-Cola. How in the world does a brand built entirely on sugary drinks survive when the entire societal narrative pivots toward health, wellness, and environmental mindfulness?
It began with that perceptual mapping we talked about earlier. Coca-Cola looked at the landscape and saw that the white space for natural was closing fast. Competitors like LaCroix owned the natural flavor axis, while brands like Adian dominated the ecological purity narrative. Coke couldn't just invent a sudden health halo. People would see right through it.
So they pivoted the narrative entirely. They introduced Coke Life and Coke Zero, and they framed it not as giving up the sweetness you love, but as liberation. Liberation from excess, liberation from guilt. Their specific tagline was brilliant: thirst for less, sip more. They took their functional clarity, low sodium, zero sugar, and aligned it with the cultural lexicon of mindfulness and minimalism.
And their platform execution was incredibly deliberate. On Instagram, they utilized vivid visual cues of natural ingredients to capture aesthetically driven younger demographics. On LinkedIn, they shared serious, data-driven sustainability reports about their carbon footprint. And on TikTok, they leaned into the algorithm by partnering with humorous creators who use the drink as a low-sugar catalyst, keeping the storytelling informal and peer-led.
But they didn't just launch it and hope for the best. They created an internal repositioning charter to keep the message unified across the entire massive company. And externally, they tracked their share of voice weekly. When they noticed that their traditional association with sipping joy was declining, they didn't panic. They successfully pivoted the position to the simplification of joy. They maintained the tension between their authentic history and the need to adapt.
That case study perfectly illustrates the core thesis here. Positioning demands ecological intelligence. You have to be able to read the cognitive temperature of your market and respond with a narrative that feels emergent, not forced.
So what does this all mean? It means that positioning is not a one-time event. You don't just write a bio and walk away. It is a perpetual recalibration. It's an ongoing dialogue between what you are, what the market wants, and how human brains actually process information. It is the art of balancing your deep, authentic truth with the ruthless demands of the digital attention economy.
This raises an important question, though. We've talked extensively today about positioning yourself to appeal to human cognitive biases and navigating algorithms. But as artificial intelligence increasingly becomes the gatekeeper of information, literally reading the perceptual maps and summarizing the world for us, how will you adapt your positioning when your primary audience is no longer a human mind, but an AI agent deciding whether you exist at all?
Wow, that is a chilling and incredible thought to chew on. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive today. We hope this conversation gives you the tools to look at your own brand, your own career, and maybe even question your own ontological signature out there in the noise. Keep learning, keep evolving, and we will catch you next time.